Over a year ago, I released The Curious Case of Cheating in MvM, a 27-minute-long deconstruction surrounding the ethics of cheating in a PvE game mode, coupled with all of the drama that encompassed its creation. Well, lucky for you guys, the MvMCU has an unending roster of villainy, and I think it's about time we finally start our Phase 2. I am warning you guys right now, if you thought Part 1 was rife with absurdity, you have seen nothing yet. If you haven't watched the original video, it's not a requirement, but much of this one will be piggybacking off the points made there. It's been months upon months of unparalleled degeneracy, but the case must continue for your viewing pleasure. If you think you've seen it all, I promise you, you haven't. So get ready to witness the apex of tribalism, the apex of lunacy, the apex PCs I'm officially partnered with. Do you spend all your time at your PC struggling to crack 60 FPS on games released back during the Bush administration? Well, that was the gaming experience I had for most of my life. Check my old videos, and the difference is very noticeable. Ever since the upgrade, we now got quadruple the frame rate, graphics cranked up from low to high, and over 6 times the bitrate for recording footage. 2500 used to be the max my old PC could muster. If you wouldn't sleep on a plank of wood, you shouldn't be gaming on a pile of ass, especially if you're trying to become a content creator. The added performance makes every aspect much easier. To be fully transparent, making your own PC from scratch will usually be cheaper. But after seeing most of my friends fuck up their own builds on many different occasions, I decided to spare myself that headache. Never mind the stress of incompatible parts, bad cable management, potential damages, or accidentally thermal pasting your scrotum to the motherboard, I just bought a pre-built and I never looked back. If you got the same mindset that I do, Apex Gaming PCs has you covered. Be sure to click the link in the description below and use the code TF2 for up to $250 off your next purchase. And now, back to the video. There were a couple of contentions people had regarding the stated conclusion that cheating in MvM is a ubiquitously negative thing for the game mode. So to solidify this video's foundation, I feel the need to go a bit more in depth. Arguably, the point met with the most amount of pushback was that the personal enjoyment experienced by the cheaters and the teammate beneficiaries should have no bearing on whether or not aimbotting is acceptable within the game. Now, I can completely understand where this disagreement comes from. Pretty much every other case of cheating in PvE rightfully adopts it as a default precedent. So hand-waving it away as some kind of irrelevant claim was met with many a refutation. People claiming left and right that they're either pro-cheating because it accelerates the process of loot farming, or that they're anti-cheating because it invalidates much of the challenge. I want to stress that neither of these mindsets are inherently wrong. Everyone lands somewhere on the gambling versus gameplay spectrum. But just because you recognize both perspectives are valid doesn't mean the game mode is absolved of drawing clear lines in the sand. The attitudes held by different players may not be incorrect, but how the game designs around them absolutely can be. The issue here is that should fun factor be the metric to gauge whether or not aimbotting is left unchecked, that's a lot of cheaters getting a free pass. And so that begs the question, should those cheaters get a free pass? In my opinion, the answer always hinges on whether or not it produces negative outcomes for non-consenting parties. And in the case of man versus machine, it's hard to argue it doesn't. Cheating expedites the total amount of completed tours via external means inaccessible within the game itself. And, at least in Man Up, this means that an arbitrarily generated amount of loot is being dumped into the economy without any kind of coinciding demand increase to act as a counterbalance. Now, due to cheating being a rarity, we don't see this at scale, and as a result, it's hard to point to any kind of item devaluation and proclaim cheating as the causal effect. We can't gaze into an alternate universe where cheating is widespread, normalized, and encouraged by most of the player base to get a good case study. Oh wait, yes we can. For anyone not in the know, MvM was subjected to a 2-week-long exploit that allowed everyone to max out their upgrades right from the jump. letting average groups churn through missions at unholy paces. The player base en masse adopted a use it before you lose it mantra, and it became nearly impossible to find a single match where the glitch wasn't being abused. While not as scandalous as downloading external software to net an advantage, the infinite money glitch was the in-game manifestation of the win button analogy used in part 1. A new path of least resistance was paved, and everyone flocked towards it, regardless of how unhealthy it was for the game. More than anything, though, it became an unintended experiment, one that would either prove or disprove the hypothesis surrounding loot devaluation and whether it was a factor worth considering. And looking at the prices today, the argument checks out. Pretty much every single Australium in the game has taken a 10 to 20% dip in price within the following months after the glitch was introduced. And that was for a cheat only in the game for a couple of weeks. Imagine if it went on even longer. Sure, traditional cheating methods will likely never be as pervasive as the infinite money glitch was, but that knowledge doesn't grant it immunity from the negative relationship between artificially acquired loot and devaluing the game's incentive structure. Now, to many people, including myself, this was an obvious outcome. I even went so far as to arrogantly refer to it as an irrefutable argument in my original video. To my naive surprise, many took this as a challenge, and refute they did, claiming that the cheapening of Australiums via rampant increases in ill-gotten gains is good, actually. Now, we could talk about how the inaccessibility of these items is in large part what grants them their prestige in the first place, a diamond's not expensive because it's shiny kind of deal, but that's a separate conversation we don't need to have today. The focal point should be on how it negatively affects man versus machine as a game mode. Contrary to unpopular yet still somewhat prevalent belief, man versus machine has always been and will always be unprofitable. It doesn't matter how much money you start with. If you play the game mode for long enough and keep reinvesting the winnings, you will eventually end up with nothing. This applies to any form of gambling where the odds are even slightly out of your favor. The house always wins is a cliche for a reason. However, a key principle still holds true. The closer your odds are to the break-even point, the more appealing that avenue becomes to new players. And in relation to MvM, nothing better exemplifies this concept than the tours themselves. Despite the fact that 4 tours in the game all drop Australiums, 2 cities is far and away the most popular, accounting for nearly 80% of all completed tours according to recent data. Why is that the case? Well, part of it is the player association between it and Australium weapons, seeing as it was a tour that introduced them, and another part is undoubtedly the more well-designed map and wave layouts, but I'd argue the strongest and most well-known factor favoring 2 cities is the better return on investment. When factoring in estimated drop rates including robot parts, fabricators, killstreak kits, potential Australiums, and the lottery ticket of winning the golden pan, you'll average around 84 cents back for every dollar spent. Still unprofitable, still in the red, but this is a figure that many find worthy enough to play ball with. On the contrary, if we look at Gear Grinder, Mecha Engine, and Steel Trap, their ROIs are significantly lower than that of 2 cities, and that's proportionally reflected in their completion rates. Why do I bring all of this up? To make the point that the further you deviate from the potential to break even, the more the player base starts to dwindle. And that is my greatest concern here. Increasing the supply of Australiums isn't inherently bad. Everyone has just as much a right to gamble for big-ticket items as anyone else. But what is bad is artificial inflation, using outside means inaccessible to legitimate players that allow for more spins of the wheel than would otherwise exist. If you want to normalize that, go ahead, but look at the price fluctuations. This is what 2 weeks of it got us. I can assure you, if you're looking at this as a positive, you're not seeing the big picture. Through increasing the supply in this manner, you, directly or indirectly, cheapen the value of these items. This devaluation widens the gap between the average return and the break-even point, which proportionally makes Man Up less appealing to play, stifling both the game mode's new player growth and current player retention. And unless your MO is wanting man versus machine to die off, this is irrefutably a bad thing. To me, this is a perfectly reasonable conclusion to reach based on the facts presented. But unfortunately, or I guess fortunately in the name of content, a lot of dedicated MvM players aren't all that bright. You may remember how in part 1, I detailed the pre-release backlash from those who equated my temporary association with PizzaBot as a quasi-endorsement of them as an organization, and in their eyes, deservedly earned me the moniker of a cheater sympathizer. Even in context, this was an absolutely bullshit claim. There were literally no other methods to expeditiously collect relevant gameplay barring downloading the client myself, which I'm sure would have gone over just as well. Of course, after the video was finalized and shown to promote an anti-cheating mindset alongside multiple statements of condemnation, it became apparent that this was a knee-jerk reaction and that this narrative would be corrected going forward. Not. To this very day, there still remains a subset of the MvM community who genuinely, unironically believe that my original video was a farce and that I'm secretly goading on cheaters from the peephole in my closet. From what I've gathered, this accusation has been mostly spread around by TacoBot members, current, adjacent, and senior, as well as a couple of regulars in Venusian Rapper's old Discord server. Clearly, we're dealing with the most upstanding of adversaries. To reiterate, the thesis of my original video was that I'm against cheating in MvM, but most of the arguments people make against it are shit, most of the people who aggressively dedicate themselves to taking down cheaters are dickbags, and the widespread solution of griefing every team with a cheater on it is not something I'm willing to endorse ubiquitously. Hell, I never even claimed that the go-to argument of upholding the integrity of the game was a moot point. I just said it was unconvincing to anyone who didn't already agree it was a value worth protecting. It's the equivalent of telling an active robber that stealing is bad. Like, yeah, no shit. And you're not incorrect. But do you really think a vague platitude is substantive enough to actually change anyone's mind? It makes me wonder if any of these people even care about shifting the public perception around cheating to a more favorable angle, rather than just using it as a pet cause to continually posture about how morally virtuous they are. The fact that I can make a video arguing in favor of their position, yet simply posing a series of objections to the traditional arguments and attitudes being put forward, is enough to align myself with the enemy and propagate that narrative wholesale. I'm not denying that there could have been an increase in apathy towards aimbotters after the video launched, but if you genuinely believe that your anti-cheating agenda was so infallible to the point of warranting a 1,000-man blacklist and hundreds of hours worth of griefing, a 19-year-old dropout playing devil's advocate on the internet for all of 7 minutes shouldn't have been the case breaker that swayed public opinion. If steelmanning the opposing arguments was all it took to take PizzaBot's side over yours, please explain to me how that's my fault. Some of them have even referenced my tor count to robot killed ratio being suspiciously low as evidence of me being in bed with cheaters. But if you did even the most bare bones of research, you'd learn that resetting your character stats also applies to your achievement progress, a box I tick pretty regularly. Look, I'm not trying to get too off track here, but holy shit, I've seen multiple people lend this conspiracy theory a shocking amount of credibility when it deserves fucking none. I didn't turn people into cheater sympathizers. You did. And that's really the problem. Regardless of any behind-the-scenes squabbles or 200-page-long manifestos, PizzaBot presents themselves as polite, as cordial, as people whose actions may be disagreeable, but can ultimately leverage their more well-respected image against the vitriol of TacoBot and their associates, even if they might potentially have a point. I have no idea what's happening with PizzaBot nowadays. Their website's been completely wiped, and I haven't run into any of their members for a very long time. Their reign as the de facto cheater group has seemingly come to an end, leaving room for another tribe to fill those shoes. And, well, one bunch in particular has jumped at the opportunity. This group has branded themselves as an MvM carrying service, and for that reason, I won't be mentioning them by name. But even if I wanted to, every member I've come into contact with has privated their profile, so it looks like anonymity is their new company policy. Presumably, so they aren't blacklisted from common TF2 trading sites, as has been done repeatedly to similar groups in the past. Now, back when the very concept of this video was a sperm in this channel's ballsack, I was taking whatever opportunities presented themselves to record some relevant B-roll. This meant on any occasion I'd find myself in a lobby with cheaters, I figured it'd be worth it to scope them out because I'd likely one day need the footage. And thus, I found myself repeatedly in contact with this newfound cheating group. And, well, let's just say they have a mild ambivalence to the concept of optics. Our first encounter started the same as any other. The cheaters autopilot the mission while I sit back and record. Of course, not actually needing to play the game gives them plenty of time to look through my profile, and despite my alias and a lack of banana drip, they managed to deduce who I was. They asked me why I was sticking around, seeing as I don't play with cheaters, and I gave them the honest answer. But once I switched to Pyro and started messing with their Godspot invincibility, it became abundantly clear I wasn't playing the pacifist route. At which point they decided to stop their shenanigans, AFK and spawn, throw the wave, drop some racism in chat, gang rape the mic with whatever's planted in the decrepit basement of their spam folders, and kick me from the game. An interesting confrontation, but that was only the beginning. 2 days later, I would stumble upon their group again, this time on Manhattan. The moment I joined the game, I met with the same ear rape I was subjected to last time, with everyone AFKing and spawn once more. The disparaging comments left by one of the group's members all but confirmed what was implicit the whole time. This was very clearly an attempt to protest the recording of their organization. In response, they then proceeded to spam the N-word over the mic for over 12 minutes straight. You know, for being such a card-carrying cheater supporter, I don't feel all that supported. After half an hour of no action, I decided to tap out. I'd seen enough at that point. Or did I? A week after the second encounter, I managed to find myself in game with them a third time, and it was the exact same shit. They stopped playing the game, AFK'd and spawned, spammed the ear-raping buyback sound effect, before the infinite money glitch was discovered by the way, flooded the chat with multiple rejoins, attempted a bit of griefing, and kicked me from the game yet again. And that was the last I ever saw of them. For about 3 weeks. If you thought that was enough time to let bygones be bygones, you haven't played MvM enough. Take a wild guess at what happened this time.
I fucking hate n****s. I want all them f***s to hang themselves, fuck n****s.
And that was the actual final moment I had in game with them. For many on the fence about cheating in MvM, the tipping point as to which side you may come out in favor of can often land on the personalities of those involved. It's why so many people were Team PizzaBot the first time around. Because they were fighting an almost universally panned shit stain in our community, that fact alone was enough to dismiss the cheating aspect as a non-issue. But unless you're a flagrant racist, good chance you're not championing these guys anytime soon. So now we can rule out a preferential winner based on attitude and have the discussion independent of their behavioral conduct. You might think there's not much left to go over at this point, and in a descriptive sense, there really isn't. But we haven't really gone over how we should be dealing with the cheater problem. Valve obviously isn't gonna step in. If they can't get cheaters out of casual, no shot MvM's getting priority there, especially when it's in their short-term financial interest to do nothing at all. So the next best choice is a community-created solution. People going out of their way to grief any lobbies that relate to cheating of any sort. Now, arguably the biggest criticism I get from the hardcore anti-cheater types is that I'm not fully supportive of this endeavor, and you'll see exactly why as the video goes on. But for now, let's give this approach as much credence as possible. As I've read through the comment section on part 1 over time, one thing I found very interesting were the differing opinions people had towards Basil fucking with the cheaters. Many saw it as a positive, with his anti-hero chaotic good behavior seeming worthy of praise, while others decried it as a needlessly hostile shit-stirring power fantasy. Now, I myself stated that despite my long history of avoiding Basil at every turn, I didn't object to what he was doing to the cheaters specifically. Funny, yes. Absurd, absolutely. Immoral? I don't think so. This gets into the much broader discussion of under what conditions are griefing games acceptable. But before we get into that, we have to have the discussion on the griefers' terms, and that means adopting their definitions for the sake of continuity. So, for the uninitiated, cheater refers to any player using external software that grants an otherwise impossible to acquire advantage within the game. People using exploits or overpowered items might fit a colloquial definition of the word, but they won't be accounted for in this video. Cheater supporter refers to any individual who won't push back against having a cheater in their lobby. They probably don't cheat themselves, but they're down with getting what is essentially a free win, even if it means invalidating the use of external methods. You could maybe make an argument that just because you play with cheaters doesn't necessarily mean you support their inclusion, differentiating individuals from systems and all that shit, but this is the criteria that most anti-cheaters adopt, so it's the one we'll be running with today. Griefer refers to any player who intends on purposefully roadblocking their teammates to produce an outcome antithetical to the original goal. Shooting on your own net, abusing friendly fire in games where it's present, or in MvM's case, airblasting a bomb-carrying giant to the hatch. Finally, we have the innocent players, people who have shown no evidence of being either cheaters or cheater supporters. Now, the concept of hacking in video games is often treated as a black and white, good or bad dichotomy, but with even a moment of introspection, you'll realize it's a big spectrum of severity. Plug some invincibility cheats into GTA, no one bats an eye. Do the same within an environment that has actual accreditation, and, well, that's a career ender. Both of these cases would technically fall under the definition of cheating, and by extension, not taking issue with the former may brand you a cheater supporter. But I think we can all agree that equating these two situations would be disingenuous. One's no harm, no foul, the other's big foul, much harm. Now you might ask, what's the point of making this distinction? Well, it just so happens that, according to the poll I conducted on the matter, man versus machine tends to fall somewhere in the middle, with only half of the player base having a zero-tolerance policy against cheating. As a result, this makes the approach on how to deal with them a much more complicated process. The standard operation of just kick the cheater that applies to every other game mode in TF2 is absent in MvM for multiple reasons. 1. Needing a majority rule on whether or not to kick the cheater in the first place is a dice roll rather than an assured guarantee. 2. Cheaters often find themselves queuing in parties, so passing a vote kick is much stricter, if not impossible. And 3. Valve still hasn't bothered to amend the fact that kicked players can repeatedly join back from any game they were tossed out of, nullifying that solution entirely. This has created an environment where many of the hardcore anti-cheaters were poised into a position of self-governance. And credit where credit is due, it is a creative solution. Oh, what's that? You don't like airblasting pyros? Yeah. Sure you don't. A pyro griefing with airblast effectively forces the game into an indefinite stun lock, a tactic powerful enough to single-handedly throw the state of the game into an unending limbo with nothing anyone can do to prevent it. Needless to say, if such an ability is to remain in the game, we need a rock-solid criteria to keep things under control. And unfortunately, the players spearheading the griefing of cheaters in particular are these guys. Yeah. Trusting TacoBot to come up with an adequate criteria on when to enact their own vigilante justice is about as intelligent as trusting a fart after a night of McDonald's and whiskey. And that's a shame, because I don't think griefing is inherently a bad thing. It only becomes an issue when bad actors use it with nefarious intent. This actually happens quite a lot in the MvM community. TacoBot co-ops an argument, ingrains it into its brand, and because everyone has a visceral reaction to their members, the occasional grains of truth regarding the game's culture or mechanics become inseparable to them as an organization, warping the perception entirely. I ask that, regardless of what's shown in this video, you analyze these actions entirely on their own merits, and not whether or not it's remotely perpetuated by TacoBot. So that was a long preamble, but I think it's finally time we answer the question of under what conditions are griefing games justified. Let's start from the most egregious examples and work our way down. A full lobby's worth of cheaters? Grief away. This is a full group of people engaging in a harmful practice that will negatively affect the game long term. Granted, doing so will usually be short-lived as they have a clear majority for a vote kick, but this isn't something I'd hold against anybody. What about a lobby with one cheater but a bunch of supporters? People who may not cheat themselves, but have all recognized that there is indeed an aimbotter on their team, and have all agreed to let him stay to get things moving faster. In my opinion, griefing them is warranted too. In fact, all the first-person footage shown in this video was done almost entirely under these conditions, and I feel no shame about it. Funnily enough, in one instance, despite sticking around the entire time, the other members of the group actually condoned my actions, and when an attempt was made to vote kick me, they decided against it. Au contraire, they decided to kick the cheaters instead, wasting their time and stealing their loot. This confirms to me the inclination I had regarding at least a portion of the consensus on cheating in MvM. It seems like the majority of people think it's wrong and believe it shouldn't be in the game, but if they can reap the benefits for all it's worth, some players value doing that over abstaining from or combating against said behavior. And while I disagree with that viewpoint, I don't feel any kind of personal resentment to anyone who thinks otherwise. I don't feel compelled to question the character behind those who abuse the infinite money glitch, for example, at least anywhere close to the degree I would with the same interaction in a PvP game mode. We can cry about the individual responsibility to uphold the game's virtues all we want, but the fact of the matter is that if a kid's surrounded by chocolate, good chance they're gonna eat it. It should be on Valve to make the path of least resistance one that makes cheating an inability, not on the players to avoid acting in their own self-interest. Sure, there's the long-term negative effects this standard serves to create, but in the moment, from mission to mission, that's practically invisible. And when there's an external reward structure tied to a mission's completion, it's no surprise the pull towards anarchy is met with a bolstering effect. I completely agree the onus should be on the developer to put the proper boundaries in place, but that doesn't change our current situation. While I don't hold any ill will to people who desire impulsively pressing the free loot button, the fact of the matter is that cheating in MvM unequivocally hurts the game's longevity, period. And with no fix on the horizon, I see no issue with the community raising their flamethrowers and discouraging it as much as possible. In theory. See, if those were the only two scenarios where griefers thought their actions were warranted, I wouldn't be making this video, nor would I have portrayed Basil in such a negative light. As far as I'm concerned, this is a principled, virtuous use of the tool at hand that shouldn't be discouraged. But if Reddit has taught us anything, it's that 25-year-old neats and a shitload of incontestable authority don't really mesh well. I mentioned earlier how being against the laissez-faire temperament surrounding griefing missions got me into hot water behind the scenes. Well, get ready to keep rolling that boil. A few months back, I was queuing for some mecha engine when I eventually stumbled on a game in progress. Within the first 10 seconds, I was chastised for taking too long to connect. Oh, now you joy!
He took too long to connect, so he's getting kicked.
Called a very naughty no-no word, and kicked from the game. A fascinating, yet unsurprising introduction given our beautiful ensemble of characters. The first of this tyrannical trio is Bill Gaither, a former TacoBot member who holds the title of the most amount of toxicity compilations on YouTube, and that's despite half of them getting wiped off the platform for hate speech. Through the grapevine, I've heard that Bill Gaither is one of the only people to have been ostracized from TacoBot for being too antagonistic. He was kicked out of the toxicity group for being too toxic. That's like getting kicked out of the KKK for being too oh wait. In response to this departure, Bill Gaither created the MvM Animal Research Institute, also known as Maribot, which houses some of MvM's most unhinged players. Too cool for TacoBot, in a sense. It's not really a competitor, I just felt like it was worth mentioning. A lot of people have chalked him up to playing a character, and while his profile letting it all hang out may point to that theory, if that were true, it means he's been keeping up the act for half a decade.
Child, I will come to your fucking house and beat the shit out of you and impregnate your fucking sister and wife. At fucking 4.
Points for tenacity, I guess. Next of the bunch is XJT, who probably has the second largest catalog of toxicity videos on YouTube. Surprise, surprise, he's also a former TacoBot member, infamous for the not playing idling till loot rejoin spam, usually prompted by a team member playing Pyro, regardless of gas. He has a bunch of alt accounts set up with a VPN adjusted to the closest available IP to where the server is located, allowing him to kick players on last and have an up and ready alt account prompted to take their spot. His profile is what really kills me. I am often immediately accused of being a TacoBot. Upon researching this group and what the deal with it is, I have come to realize I am in fact on their report list myself. I like how coy he's being about his prior involvement. It's almost like the Wayback Machine doesn't exist. Additionally, taco bots often interfere to the highest extent when dealing with uncooperative teammates, such as griefing the servers with Pyro Air Blast. I never do this.
Foreshadowing is a narrative device.
And finally, we have Sam the Skeleton, another former TacoBot member, I'm beginning to see a trend, who mostly just acts as Bill Gaither's minion. I don't really have much to comment on, he's mostly an off-screen sidekick, so here's his response to my Gas Passer video. Hey, man, good reaction of the shit video with ridiculous ending. You know why he made that vid? Because for juicy views. You can clearly see he got more views on that video than he is having with other vids in average. Bashing on TacoBot is still one of very few ways two typical TF2bers getting views. But they don't realize that after that, their relevance is dropping very fast. Oh, I don't think it is. You know guys, it probably makes Sam really mad if you gave this video a like. And while you're down there, after being kicked by a group of these guys, any rational person would avoid the re-queue button like the plague. I am not rational. They were well aware of who I was, with Sam even attempting to milk me for more information as to why I was sticking around. But after what happened with the cheaters, I decided to leave that one on red. It was clear they just wanted to three-man the mission with the infinite ammo Godspot sniper strat. These are the same people who bitch about the Gas Passer for being too overpowered, by the way. We eventually completed the second wave and progressed on to the final boss. But unfortunately, I've been around enough TacoBots to know that a last wave vote kick was in the cards for me. And seeing as they had the player majority, there was nothing I could do to prevent it. So I laid back and waited for the vote to be called. But it never came. I mean, Bill Gaither was getting really impatient at the tail end of Wave 6.
Holy fucking shit, why are you so slow? Move, you fat obese fucks. Holy shit. Get the fucking grease out of your fucking hands and do some fucking shit already. Hurry the fuck up, I have shit to do.
It looks like I may have gotten a lucky break. I caught Bill at a time where he was much more focused on getting the mission over with rather than making life hell for everyone else. I had you going there, didn't I?
You think any of you are allowed to complete? Fuck no. This game is now property of the Man Up Animal Research Institute. Every one of you stupid fucking is now tick listed. You are prohibited now from getting a single game of Man Up now. From this point fucking on, you will be kicked in every last fucking way by hyper gods such as myself.
Unbeknownst to many of you, even the hardest bosses in the game are not immune to Air Blast. And by perpetually keeping them in spawn, there's no way to complete the mission. You might be wondering, how long did this go on for? 5 minutes? 10, maybe? Nope. 41. 41 goddamn minutes. Usually, griefers can't go this long. They're limited by ammo consumption, their own personal boredom, and the potential for a kick vote, ineffective as it may be. But a three-man goof troop fixes all of these issues. The doubled air blast radius makes it impossible for any robots to slip by, and the engineer's dispenser allows them to go as long as they want. You can literally type plus attack 2 in console and go to work, go to school, go to your divorce hearing, and the giant will not have moved an inch. There have been tales of those who have griefed for 8, 16, even 24 hours non-stop because spite is a powerful motivator. Your only options from here are to either leave the game, restart the entire mission, or find some way to talk them out of it. Not the most pleasant of multiple choice conundrums. In any case, they did eventually relent and started air blasting the boss to the hatch, intentionally losing us the game. They then proceeded to kick the 2 other innocent players on the team before giving me a grand exit.
No, shh, everyone, he's a YouTuber, we must treat him with respect. So, it's the last wave, we've cleared out all the retards, so I think you know what time it is. Cue the music! Kick time! Want it! Kick time! Kick time! Bye-bye! So server, come again, thank you!
And that was it. A full lobby destroyed with no way to fight back. It really shows just how badly air blast griefing can be abused if thrown into the wrong hands. But at the very least, we can take solace in the fact that this kind of permanent game locking is a rarity. It requires a squad of 3 people, all on the same wavelength of unmediated degeneracy. Sure, one air blasting pyro can put a dent in, but eventually that ammo pool will run dry, and with a pyro on your end to counteract any intentional bomb pushing, it's still possible to come out on top. Thankfully, there's no way for a single person to indefinitely prevent the game from finishing. If that were the case, we'd be in big trouble.
Foreshadowing is a narrative device.
If you're at all a fan of watching MvM rage content, there's a good chance you've been recommended this video. It's centered around a player by the name of Matthias, one of MvM's most prominent high tours. Notably, he ranks at number 13 in the world on Gear Grinder, MvM's second most popular tour. He's obviously been going at the game mode for a very long time, and like many high tour Harrys, Matthias is not a big fan of the gas passer. Now, that's not an uncommon opinion amongst veterans especially, and despite all the hyperbolic squawking you might see on YouTube, not everyone who dislikes the gas passer is a raving lunatic. Many understand that they're in the minority with that opinion, and rather than compel the 90% pro-gas player base to conform to their demands, they instead recognize that the responsibility is on them to find a group of like-minded players who all share that unpopular viewpoint. Clearly, that is the simplest, most diplomatic approach you could take. Not for Matthias. Instead of taking the much more courteous route of finding another game, Matthias had a shit-slinging meltdown over the ordeal, protesting the use of the gas passer by going AFK in spawn and repeatedly joining back despite numerous vote kicks. You'd be right to think that this kind of depravity is exceptionally overdramatic, but, it gets much worse from here. You see, this outburst was done on Cataclysm, one of the 3 missions necessary to complete a full tour. Cataclysm is played on Coal Town, a map added during the initial release of Man vs. Machine back in 2012, and hasn't received any updates since. This wasn't really a problem until it was found that a very problematic bug slipped through the cracks years ago, and to this day, it has not been properly remedied. If you airblast a small robot extremely far back, it'll fall out of bounds and teleport to its last recorded location. If done at a particular angle, the robot's pathfinding will be permanently broken and unable to progress into damageable territory. If that robot happens to be a required kill in order to complete the wave, you're fucked. There's nothing you can do to untangle this mess. I don't think I need to spell out what happened, do I? Coincidentally, I ended up joining this exact game when Matthias began enacting his revenge, so I got to see it play out in real time. It really struck me how, despite the fact this was the cause of only one dude, we had less options on how to move forward than we did with the trio earlier. At least on Big Rock, there was the possibility of being able to negotiate some kind of peace treaty, as fruitless of an endeavor as it may be, but on Coal Town, when it's done, it's done. Either restart the mission or leave the game. Those are your only choices. This is, once again, a blatant example of someone taking a tool whose existence can be justified in the name of griefing cheaters, and instead using it as a proxy to enact one's own sense of justice, but with a moral compass shakier than a Furby diagnosed with Parkinson's. And all of this drama, all of it, it's just the beginning. In fact, I've debatably saved the best for last. 10 days after what transpired with Matthias, I found myself queuing into another game with him, this time under a much different circumstance. Rather than playing the game or even griefing the lobby, everyone on the team was just AFKing in spawn while Matthias engaged in some nonsensical ramblings with another player. Some allusions to supporting cheaters and low-manning missions, but honestly nothing of note happened here. What's notorious about this encounter is the other player caught up in the bickering. Gentleman, a notable gear grinder farmer himself. His profile and inventory are private, and as a result can't be properly tracked, but this number of 567 would place him squarely in the top 50 worldwide. Gentleman is an interesting character. I remember meeting him in game around a year ago, where he then engaged in some kind of high tour hogwash. To be completely honest, I don't exactly remember what happened. I've had so many bad experiences with high tours that the long list of offenses starts to blend together. All I know is he did some dumb shit that for forever cemented his name as one to avoid, and I've given him the Basil treatment ever since, immediately tapping out whenever I come across him. Given the clear unwillingness to make peace with each other, it was clear the mission wasn't going to go past Wave 1, and with everyone in agreement, we all went our separate ways. Until another 10 days later, where I ended up joining a Cataclysm mission in progress with none other than Gentleman to greet me. Usually this would be met with an instant requeue like usual, but it was Wave 5. We were so close to the end, and, you know, it has been almost a year. He's probably forgotten about the situation by now, and he does have beef with one of Gear Grinder's most toxic players. Who knows, maybe he's reformed. So I gave him a chance, and for the following 2 waves, things progressed as normal, with Gentleman aiding the team to the best of his abilities. We finally reach the last wave, and he decides to switch to Pyro, a move you think would spark suspicion, but the wave is centered around half a dozen tanks. A Flog Pyro is an amazing counterpick and one of the best in the game for... That's not the Flog. Why aren't you using the Flog? It didn't take too long for Gentleman to make his intentions clear, as he nearly instantaneously shackled the bomb carrier to the cliffside. At this point, I thought it was game over, but then I remembered there was still a chance at recovery. Gentleman may have locked off the possibility of a robot capping the bomb, but all of the tanks were still in play. If we could manage to let them deploy, we'd be able to restart the wave. At which point, I entirely abstained from attacking them, switched to spy via retry command, and abused the fuck out of my caps lock key because larger letters equals heightened authority. Unfortunately, everyone else on the team was a low tour and completely oblivious to the situation at hand. Despite all my constant shouting, the rest of the team never listened, not helped by Gentleman brazenly spam calling medic to drown out my pleas. The team had destroyed 5 out of the 6 tanks. We only had one more chance to deploy the bomb and keep the mission from locking, but with no indication that the low tours were going to change their minds, it was looking all but over from here on out. Thank God they're fucking terrible. With the Gentleman tunnel visioning himself so heavily on the tank, the rest of the team were responsible for taking care of the 4 giant heavies and the support bots that dropped alongside them. Thankfully, even with maxed out upgrades, this was too much for the low tours to bear. The giants weren't dying fast enough, and no one was buying back. So Gentleman was left alone, doused in barbecue sauce, and thrown into the lion's den. Despite all of his crit canteen spam, he couldn't burn down the tank in time, and we were given one more chance to save the mission. To any knowledgeable group, this should have been the end for Gentleman, but unfortunately, the low tours were still completely oblivious as to what was going on. Seconds before the tank managed to cap, one of them remarked with annoyance at my unwillingness to play the game.
Spy, sap the heavies.
It became clear that the noobs were ignorant enough to be manipulated. So manipulate he did. Gentleman immediately cranked up the gaslighting to 11, feigning his engagement in any kind of foul play. He disoriented the low tours enough to where they refused to kick him, giving him even more opportunity to lock the game. Maybe the best move would be to cut my losses and find a new team, but I wasn't going down without a fight. The objective? Well, I think you know at this point. By playing goalie, I was successfully able to defend the cliff from Gentleman's antics, with him being unable to replicate his briefing. But now we run into the problem of actually finishing the game. With Gentleman engaging in active sabotage and me needing to keep tabs on his every last move, the onus was on the rest of the team to complete the wave short-handed. And considering 4 giant heavies alongside a tank were enough to do them in last round, the final result wasn't exactly unpredictable, and thus began yet another round of psychological warfare. So between Gentleman, the pyro actively trying to fuck over the game, and me, the pyro actively trying to protect the game, which one did the team decide to kick? That's right, the medic. Yeah, cause he was the real problem. This vote kick then prompted 2 of the other low tours to leave the game, leaving 3 player-sized holes ready to be filled. Who joined next and what side they would end up taking would determine the future of the game. The first player to join was Lucy, who, unbeknownst to me at the time, was one of the players partied up with Gentleman during the encounter with Matthias. The second player was Schwabble, a member of TacoBot known for his similar antics of mischief. At this point, the votes were 3-2 at best, and Gentleman knew this, all but declaring victory at the mere sight of his brethren joining in. But then, a hero emerged. As the vote kick was being called, the third and final player joined into the game. Hollow Wolf, the medic who was kicked 10 minutes ago, came in at the last second with an emergency F2. We're still in the game. Upon the vote kick failing, Schwabble immediately began playing dumb. I guess feigning association with wrongdoers is a part of the TacoBot handbook. I attempted to lay out his dishonesty to the group, but with their E-keys getting DP'd, I couldn't make a lasting impact. After minutes of doing nothing, waiting around for the voting cooldowns to deplete, one of the low tours recognized that Schwabble is indeed from TacoBot in playing everybody for a fool. Unfortunately, this revelation came 5 seconds too late, as right when it appeared the tides were turning back in our favor, the vote finally passed and I was booted from the game. I immediately joined back to find that the one player vouching on my side was also kicked, replaced by a hatless AFK Pyro, most definitely an alt of someone involved. They all had anime profile pictures too, so birds of a feather, I guess. At this point, it was 4 against 2, and there was no shot at redemption, but I was intrigued at how far they'd take it. So I got kicked and rejoined 3 separate times before they ended up letting me chill for a bit, presumably so they could rally a final member to take my spot. To my dismay, Hollow Wolf, the only original low tour left remaining, was kicked and replaced by Despised Icon, another former TacoBot member. It was over. I lost, and as I sat in my kiddie pool witnessing the flowing of F1s against my name, I began to ponder a very important question. What the fuck just happened? Seriously, how did MvM get to the point where this was a foreseeable outcome? Well, you might be shocked to learn that Gentleman might not actually believe he's in the wrong. We can't know for sure, as any attempt to get an explanation out of him fell on deaf ears, but ever since part 1 where it was confirmed I was temporarily acquiescent with PizzaBot, I've been in countless situations where these kinds of people actually defend their actions. It's not always a case of someone knowingly playing the villain. Many of them genuinely think enacting their own brand of vigilante justice is an overall benefit for the game mode, and they take great pride in putting it into action. Hell, using the gas passer is a far more innocuous crime than actively supporting the use of aimbotting, and I doubt Matthias spends his days weeping into his pillow. This is where we finally wrap the discussion back to the relationship between cheating and griefing. More specifically, the warped ways much of the anti-cheating crowd defends their own self-righteous indignation. As outlined earlier, I believe limiting the griefing to cheaters, their supporters, and not one person more is a justifiable use of the mechanic. Conversely, griefing games where all players have shown zero evidence pertaining to either of these categories is an unjustifiable use of the mechanic. In any case, there are 2 other scenarios often acted upon by griefers that I'd like to call out for what they are. Bullshit copes masquerading as moral virtue. The first of which being the absurd leaps in logic griefers will use to justify their antagonism via guilt by association. Let me give you an example. A griefer solo queues into a random lobby with 5 innocuous players, and somehow the topic of cheating in MvM rears its head. One of the players mentions how he doesn't mind if people cheat in MvM, and the griefer, fuming at this newfound revelation, decides to call a vote kick. The 4 other players on the team reject the vote, as kicking someone for non-universally agreed upon thought crimes unable to manifest within that specific lobby isn't a hook most people will bite. In my opinion, rightfully so. But to some griefers, you're no longer a group of innocent bystanders. By letting those who have a different view on cheating remain in the game, you're tacitly supporting their viewpoint and deserve to get griefed as well. You become the cheater supporters. And I guess by me outwardly claiming that's bullshit, I'm a cheater, supporter? And if you're nodding in agreement at how this is all really dumb, well, I guess you're a cheater, supporter. Do you see how this makes no fucking sense whatsoever? Well, to be honest, I actually think most griefers are on the same page. If this were a widespread belief, there'd be far more than 1,300 listings on the TacoBot website. So as it stands right now, it is a rare justification. I do think it's worth noting, however, because there are many griefers who claim to only go after cheaters and their supporters. However, they play extremely fast and loose with the definitions in order to overinflate their sense of nobility. So if you've ever been called a cheater supporter despite never playing with them in your life, this type of extrapolation is probably the reason why. And I think it goes without saying that this is causing way more problems than it's fixing. The second, and by far the more common of the two, is that the griefer recognizes that not wanting to kick a player who's apathetic to cheating doesn't necessarily make you a de facto supporter, but they don't care and you're getting your game locked anyways. Let me repeat, if one person in an entirely random lobby holds the belief that playing with aimbotters in MvM isn't the cardinal sin that some people make it out to be, everyone, even if you're anti-cheating, is not finishing the mission. They will hold the game up for ransom and fuck over all parties involved, even if the vast majority did nothing wrong, all in the name of making one guy unable to complete their tour. You don't need to pass the bar to understand that any system advocating a 4-to-1 civilian casualty ratio is a fucking indefensible position, but it's one that griefers will indulge in, repeatedly. Let's go back to that poll I conducted a year ago, which, to my knowledge, still remains the largest sample size relating to the topic. If claiming you're down to play with cheaters under some circumstances is enough to brand you a cheater supporter, a view that most griefers do concur with, then every random player you encounter while solo queuing has a coin flip's chance of being a worthwhile griefing target. And by extension, finding a random lobby where everyone agrees with the same hardline anti-cheating stance as the griefer does is pretty much the equivalent odds of landing 5 heads in a row, or in more simpler terms, about 3%. So hypothetically, if we lived in a world where everyone's own personal stances on cheating were stuck to their foreheads like that one episode of The Office, they'd find it necessary to grief 97% of lobbies because support for cheaters must be quashed. Fuck the bystanders. Obviously, this doesn't happen at a macro scale, but that's because cheaters are a rare breed and identifying their supporters heavily boils down to circumstance. But if feasibility ever became a non-issue, this is the logical extension of their approach. They're so entrenched in their degenerate, ideological faction warfare fought on the soil of a decades-old gambling sim that they apparently seem to forget that everyone in the crossfire isn't an NPC. This is no better than abusing the spectator exploit from half a year ago that forced low towards the ultimatum of playing a shorthanded game or tapping out. And shock of the fucking day, as I was looking through old footage, look who decided to do exactly that. So, to summarize, my stance on griefing cheaters is so long as innocent, non-offending parties aren't thrown into the crossfire, I'll leave you to it. But the moment that line is crossed, both your intentions and actions cease all nobility. And just for full accountability, I've encouraged this before. I was down in the gutter with the rest of them. But nowadays, you'll be hard-pressed to find me positioning myself on any kind of moral high ground for doing so. Because the sooner you realize the ends don't actually justify the means, the better your outlook on the game mode will be. So we've gone over different arguments, told a couple of stories, and hopefully had some fun watching the animals fight. But my biggest hope is that this video becomes much more than that. At this point, the toxicity surrounding man vs. machine has been embedded into its legacy, and I firmly believe that with just a couple of patches, we can see a dramatic drop-off, if not complete elimination, of the nefarious behavior shown in this video. Valve has shown they are willing to make adjustments to mitigate the hostile environment that's taken shape, even including drastic changes like removing teammate upgrade inspection, which was added as recently as 2021. So I'm gonna cross my fingers for the summer update and propose what I believe to be well-warranted implementations. 1. Fix the kick vote system. This has arguably been the biggest factor as to why so many games end up being ruined. The kick vote system barely functions at all. Currently, there exists no blocking mechanism in place that prevents booted players from just instantly joining back, rendering the one antidote designed to expel toxicity completely ineffective. Barring any kind of shafting from the larger MvM community, which many players actually revel in, there's no punishment for being a dick in-game. I'm not asking Valve to step in and moderate. We can handle that ourselves. We just need tools that actually, function. This change would greatly help, but another problem still remains. Currently, you're only able to initiate kick votes during the breaks in between waves, collectively a very small portion of the mission's uptime. And considering it's a griefer's job to make reaching them as improbable and/or as time-consuming as possible, this doesn't do much in the way of discouraging them. So I'd also recommend we add in the functionality for people to kick mid-wave, at least after a specific threshold of time has been passed. Sure, this wouldn't work against any dedicated griefing teams who have voter majority, but they're far more uncommon than the lone pyro with a chip on his shoulder, so this would put an end to the far more common situations. 2. Give robots knockback resistance. Prior to Jungle Inferno, robots weren't subject to the absurd knockback ranges we see today. Getting flung around like this was never supposed to be the norm. It was a botched, unintended side effect of reworking Pyro's Air Blast. A GitHub post made by a guy named Dr. Cactus goes a bit more in depth, as well as providing video evidence showcasing the discrepancy. I would support this change, but I'm not convinced it would be the panacea that many claim it would be. Keeping giant robots stationarily unkillable would still be possible, albeit a bit more difficult, and small robots carrying the bomb would still continually get pushed back either way, so it doesn't help much there either. That said, this change in tandem with the vote kick reform will both minimize the effects of griefing and make sure these kinds of players are permanently exiled. 3. Prevent robots from getting stuck. As I briefly alluded to earlier, the Coal Town mission lock is caused by air blasting a robot really far to where it teleports back to its last recorded area. This one might actually just be straight up fixed if the air blast nerf is implemented, but I want to cover all of our bases so we can rule it out entirely. According to Death Rowboat, who's a premier expert in MvM chicanery, there is actually a failsafe that checks whether or not a robot is stuck on map geometry. If they remain that way for 10 seconds, they're supposed to die. The issue is that they're programmed to do so via taking a shitload of damage rather than self-destruction. And because the robots are invincible when guarded by spawn protection, the failsafe doesn't work. Death Rowboat states that this shouldn't be too hard to remedy, so I figured we chuck this in as well. And finally, 4. Fix the upgrade prevention bots. A couple months ago, I made a video detailing this issue, so watch that for further elaboration. TLDR, malicious players on anonymous accounts are creating bots to purposefully spam target users with non-stop invites. This causes you to get repeatedly kicked out of the upgrade station, preventing you from ever buying any upgrades in Man vs. Machine. No amount of account blocking or private information will save you. If you are in their crosshairs, it's game over. In the same patch that buried the infinite money glitch, it was insinuated that this got fixed as well, but nope. Apparently it's still here. At the moment, this is by far the most debilitating bug in all of MvM, but thankfully, as it stands right now, it's relatively rare. However, what do you think would happen if griefers lose the ability to lock games? They'll be forced to turn towards other methods, and I have no doubt this will be the main one they utilize. If this one doesn't get removed for real this time, I foresee this one becoming the next stepping stone. It's better for everyone if we chuck it in the river. Now, we have to be transparent. Will these changes destroy all available avenues for people to indefinitely fuck over cheaters? Yes, but in my opinion, that's a privilege we can't bear to keep. The community has proven to have a scale of bad actors far surpassing the good. So yes, I do want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because it's not a baby, it's a 30-something-year-old man-child, and he just shit in the tub. As far as I'm concerned, you made your cheater-infested bed. Now lie in it. I'd much rather live in a world where aimbotters get the occasional free pass than allow these kinds of people to freely roam around unchecked. Real talk, I never expected a shitstorm like this to go as strong as it did, nor am I in any way convinced that it's ever going to end. The original video was supposed to be like a 10-minute analysis on how quickly cheated missions were completed, with maybe a couple of minutes of ethics discussion thrown in for good measure. And this video right here was originally like 8 minutes before everyone decided to be a fuckwit and chuck more sewage onto my porch. I was always waiting for someone, anyone who would go into the trenches and entertain both sides of the argument. Someone willing to not immediately paint either side with the widest brush imaginable to avoid needing to use their brain. Someone who'd urge all of you to wash your foreskin and buy a pre-built. But most importantly, someone who's hopefully been able to spread a well-intentioned message that the community can rally around and collectively guide this game mode towards a much brighter future. Imagine if someone did that.